Hey everyone, thanks for being here. This is part 2 of a 2-part podcast. For those of you that have already listened to episode 7, I continue the conversation with my brother Jason. If you've started on this episode, hey, you can listen to it, but for the first part of it, you'll want to go to episode 7. I'm so honored that you chose to stop by. We'll continue the conversation with Jason.
On October 2nd, 2017, and I were involved in a car accident that was nearly fatal for both of us. It is the most traumatic event of my life. If anyone has ever been in a bad car accident, they understand it's like just being in your normal life and suddenly being beamed to a war scene, and just all of a sudden it's war and everybody's hurt and, people are moaning and there's like this white haze from the airbags that's just kind of falling all over everything. There's broken glass. I cracked my sternum. And so I was like trying to catch my breath. That was from the seatbelt. The like those two big parts of my bone were like, it was cracked. So when I tried to breathe, that it was just the most excruciating pain I'd ever felt in my life up to that point. Her injuries were to her spleen. And so she was bleeding internally very, very badly and was actually losing consciousness at the scene. I remember very clearly this is hard to say for a lot of reasons. I just remember her saying over and over again, I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. Our anniversary is also my birthday. So that is very kind of on my mind. So anyway, initially they're going to put us in one ambulance. They just gave her own because she was in such bad shape. They wanted to get her straight into surgery. And I spent the next, 2 hours. It felt like forever, but I spent the next 2 hours or so, strapped to one of those baseboards, completely immobilized and having no idea if my wife was alive or dead. Having no idea. This guy just crossed the center line and hit us head on at 55 miles an hour. We were doing about 35, so you add those up and it would be like hitting a brick wall at 100 miles an hour. It was a incredibly violent collision. And because it wasn't, most head-on collisions happen like kind of if the cars are like that, they're not just dead straight on. So the cars have a chance to spin and lose some of the energy of the momentum of their vehicle. In our case, the cars just came square. So there was nowhere for that energy to go except through our bodies. When I'd ask people if, what's going on with my wife, is she okay? They would say something like, we're doing everything we can. She's in the best hands. And I'm like, that's what they say in the movies when somebody's going to die. Don't say that. But anyway, she made it. And my injuries were kind of incidental to the whole festivities that day. But I had a crushed heel. It's a calcaneus bone. It's kind of it just makes the kind of egg-shaped part of your heel in the back. And it's a very bad bone to break because there's not a whole lot of skin or muscle tissue around it. And so it's very hard to get it back together once it's broken. And very often there are lifelong effects, that they can't do anything about. This is one of those injuries, if you get and you're a professional athlete, it's not like an ACL where if you have access to like super advanced care, your outcome is a lot better. This is a kind of injury that sucks, period. And I had the surgery done. The surgeon did absolutely the worst thing he could possibly do with me anyway. One of the risks of this surgery is infection because the way that normal infection, that's inside the body that results from surgery is dealt with, you just load somebody up with IV antibiotics, and it's not a problem. But in my case, you've got a lot of fragile little tiny pieces of bone that have all been put together with titanium plates and screws. And so they haven't developed any vascularity yet within the bone. So they don't get blood supply. That kind of happens as it grows back together. And so if you get a bone infection, it's very hard to treat, and amputation is a very real risk, especially for one that's as bad as mine was, which was really in a bunch of pieces. he told me just before he did the surgery, I've only ever had one amputation, so don't worry. Which my mind here is I'm due.
Yeah.
I'm due for one. It's and so that seed was kind of planted, and then I get the infection, and so I was living for a period of time, laid up in bed, and I was just living in complete panic that I was going to have my foot amputated, or worse, that I was going to develop sepsis and die, because that's the reason you amputate the foot, is so the person attached to the foot doesn't die. I'm waking up every morning, checking my temperature fanatically throughout the day. I am the worst part of my day is the morning, when kind of my new reality settles in. At some point, I lost my job that I thought I was going to have, just because I couldn't go to work, But I kind of had the impression that that wasn't going to happen, that I was going to be taken care of. And, remember, this is my Camelot. This is like I've been through all the bad stuff, and now I'm living the good stuff. And it's going to be my Hollywood happy ending and everything else. The problem with that is that I had taken the steps backwards and decided that I was not powerless over alcohol, and that my life was not unmanageable as it relates to alcohol and alcohol alone, none of the other stuff. I knew I couldn't do that. And so we drank, socially, and social drinking for me turned into social drinking plus a certain amount of closet drinking that she didn't see. And for me, with anything, there was always the amount that you saw me doing and you knew that I was doing, but that was just the tip of, of the iceberg. You knew that under the water, underneath what you were aware of and seeing, there was a lot more. And I was lying about how much I was drinking, but I was employed, and, I had a good job and a job that was difficult. And so I worked during the day and drank at night. Now I'm waking up with this crushing anxiety in the morning. I don't have a way to drive or to get around. And at some point, I had this wonderful idea that, well, at least as far as the anxiety goes, I know how to deal with that. And I didn't have any kind of fellowship to fall back on. There was no sponsor. There was, I had graduated from all that stuff, I thought, which you never graduate, by the way. That's just talking about my own hubris. So one day I got an Uber and went and bought a bunch of alcohol and drank it. I had money that was from one of the smaller insurance settlements that nobody knew about or knew that I had, or controlled how I used, I should say, was aware of how I used. So I could literally do this every day, and nobody knew. That just increased so quickly because of how freaked out I was, and also just how I am. My natural proclivity for alcohol and for more. I just quickly to whatever amount I'm taking, and I need more to get the same effect. And I kind of know what I'm doing at the time. I know, again, there's a part of the book that's describing a relapse of one of the people, and he says, I knew that I was being none too smart. And that's definitely me. I had a vague sense that I was being none too smart. But again, I just kind of felt like, okay, I just get through this immediate crisis, keep my foot, don't die from infection, and then, I'll deal with the other stuff later. I've done it before. I can do it again. It's not like I'm using drugs. At least this is legal. And there is a real sense for somebody that has used drugs before that alcohol at least is legal. It's not, doesn't seem the same. It's actually worse for that reason, more dangerous, in my opinion, and much harder to stop. At some point, I was drinking all day during the day and having to wake up several times to drink to be able to sleep and not go into a full-blown panic attack. I hadn't had panic attacks in years, but the combination of the surgery and the fear of amputation and the alcohol consumption, I started drinking, or I started having panic attacks again. I would wake up in that state of feeling like I couldn't catch my breath, thinking that I was going to die, that I was fading out, the feeling that like my heart is jumping out of my chest, that I'm going crazy, that I'm about to pass out, not knowing what room I need to be in, but knowing that this room isn't it, that I came to realize is how the physical dependency of alcohol manifests itself. It's so funny. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous refers to it as the jitters because it's an old fashioned book and it talks about getting the jitters. It feels like so much worse than anything that you would just call the jitters. And unlike opiate withdrawal, which I dealt with in the past, it will kill you or can kill you if certain conditions are present or not present. My age makes me someone who, if you call a hospital, if I call a hospital and say, I want to stop drinking, I'm going to stop cold turkey. Is that a good idea? They'll say, no, that is a medical emergency. You need to come here right now, or we're going to be picking you up anyway when you have a seizure. So it was like panic attacks, but in this case, I really could die. That was the difference. This is the most miserable time in my life, bar none. Nothing even comes close, because there is something, they say that addiction and alcoholism are kind of driven by two major components. One of them is genetic component, and the other is exposure. Too much of either one alone or in combination will do it. The only exception is you could be genetically, as alcoholic as you wanted to be. If you never touched it, obviously you would never become an alcoholic. But there's a point at which your exposure to the alcohol has an effect all by itself. And I believe that this happened to me during that period, because once I hit that around the clock, nonstop, having to have alcohol in my system to not be sick or to have the jitters, I couldn't stop. Didn't matter if I got stopped. If I got stopped, I couldn't stay stopped. And I had a really hard time stopping. One of the things that we say a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous is that it's much easier to stay stopped than to stop. And that is so true. This was during the pandemic. Access to in-person meetings, which have always been way more effective than Zoom meetings or online meetings. So I would get, all heck would break loose at my house. I'd go do a 5 or 7 day detox, come out, go to meetings. Maybe I would crack the book, maybe I wouldn't. Connected with old, past friends from No Longer Bound and whatever. But there just wasn't enough structure for me during that critical, first 60 days, where it's so easy just to, and this is what I meant earlier when I said in a lot of ways alcohol was worse because it's so acceptable. You really got to do a lot of work to score heroin or crack or, cocaine or whatever. All you have to do is get in your car and drive, and the most bright signs on the road are at places that sell alcohol. It starts off so insidiously. It's what is the big deal? I could have one. And the thing that was really the thing that taught me the most about alcoholism and the most about myself, my own alcoholism, is I had bought a house. The night before our closing was supposed to take place, I had a particularly heavy day of drinking at home. And this was once I had started trying to work again after the accident, and still just kind of trying to hide the fact that I was drinking throughout the day. We saw a lot, and she was shocked by what she saw, but even what she saw wasn't it. And it was killing me financially. It was killing us financially. That night before that closing, I just had this pain in the top of my abdomen that just kind of got worse throughout the day. And at that point, my instinct for everything was, whatever ails you, just drink. It'll go away. Something hurts, drink. You feel depressed, drink. It'll go away. You feel anxious. It was a short-term remedy for everything in my mind, but I couldn't drink this pain away. Drinking was making it worse. In fact, drinking was making me get sick. Ordinarily, I had to drink to not be sick. I wasn't this, drinking and getting sick because of the drinking was novel. And I knew it was probably not a good sign. And that pain just got so much worse throughout the day. And I finally told her she was going to have to take me to the emergency room. And we did. And I had pancreatitis, acute necrotizing pancreatitis, it was nearly fatal. I was in the hospital for 17 days. The worst pain that I've ever felt in my life. Remember when I said I cracked my sternum, and it was the worst pain I'd felt up to this point. Pancreatitis beat it by a factor of 10. They tried to give me some brochures about Alcoholics Anonymous and some treatment, outpatient treatment programs when I left the hospital. And I was like, don't worry, I don't need any of that stuff. I'm never going to touch alcohol again. Are you crazy? Just because the pain was so bad. I couldn't imagine that I would ever drink again. And then that leads me to one last part of the book that I'll read you. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable, at certain times, to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. And that's what kept happening to me. I could not have any desire to have a drink remembering that pain because I still didn't know. They told me, they did their best to make me think that if I had a drop of alcohol, I could drop dead right there on the spot. And I'm a hypochondriac. So their message, let's say it landed with me pretty well. At some point, you can 24 hours in a day, break that down into minutes or seconds, 99.9% of whatever those units, however small you want to break them down, all the way to the granular level if you want. You cannot want to drink for all of that. But if there's one instant where you think, how bad could it be? Maybe I should make sure that I'm healthy. This would be a good test. All it takes is that instant. Because once the body hits my system, just like in any other alcoholic, once the alcohol is in me, the phenomenon of craving is reintroduced. And in AA, we have a lot of pithy sayings, and pithy doesn't mean what people think it means. It doesn't mean that it's stupid or trite. Pithy just means a concise statement of wisdom or truth. So we have a lot of pithy sayings in Alcoholics Anonymous, and one of them is, man takes drink, drink takes drink, drink takes man. So the idea is that it happens in that order. I'm exercising my willpower to have that first drink. Once the drink is in me, the drink is calling the shots. So the drink is saying, we're not just going to have one, we're going to have, and then you never know where that goes. We say one is too many, 1,000 is never enough. Once the alcohol is in you, you're right back where you were. Maybe not physically yet, but up here you are. And sometimes an even worse thing happens. Sometimes you have a drink and you stop, and then you actually start to think, oh yeah, I got this thing licked. It's almost better. There's some people, I'm friends with this one guy that he says, I'm allergic to alcohol. I drink alcohol and I break out in handcuffs. He literally, his last relapse, started to drink, he had to get it down quickly because he had to do this in secret because he already had 2 DUIs. He's now happily and usefully whole, as the book says. Has over a year of sobriety. But he drank as much as he could on his way home because he couldn't drink openly at home. But as he was pulling up, he nodded off and came to sitting in his car, still running, kind of sideways on the driveway on top of his crushed mailbox, with the police officer rapping on his window to wake him up. So wow. There's some people that they touch alcohol and it's literally like off to the races right here, right now. For me, it was a little more of a slow burn, but it's like I had that one, I felt better. I didn't feel as anxious. I lost some weight after the surgery and I liked that. But within 6 weeks, I was right back to the same spot. And I hated it because one of the first signs that I was in that place again is I would wake up throwing up, basically, because I had to get alcohol in my system to not be sick. And it's very, very hard to throw up in a house where a bunch of people are living without somebody knowing it. There's not a whole lot of this that's funny, but there are those moments that I look back on in a sick kind of a way. Me having to actually engage my higher faculties to try to strategically throw up in the place that will deaden sound the most. There's something that's funny about that now. It was not funny then at all. So after going through this several times. Eventually, my wife had enough and the marriage was over. And this is my final poll that gets us to my sobriety. That happened while I was on vacation. I was not allowed on the plane to go home because I was visibly intoxicated, in the words of the airline employee that told me I couldn't get on the plane. I had shouted something very loud when I walked on the plane that when it escaped my mouth, and it was so much louder than I meant for it to, but the acoustics of an airplane are different. But I said "Go Dogs" because as you well know, I'm a Georgia fan, and saw a guy decked out in Georgia gear. And so you do what you do. You're out of state, you represent. It didn't occur to me that the flight was going to Atlanta. So probably it's not that unusual that there's somebody on the plane who's a Georgia fan. But in my mind, I'm like, whoa, we're in Wyoming, dude. What are you doing? If I thought about it for just a second, just like so many other things, it would not have seemed nearly as relevant. But I shouted "Go Dogs." They said, "Please come with me." And then I got a text from Dad that said, "Hey, you just called me. Are you okay? I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better." Mom said, "Just don't make it worse." And so I spent the next several months making it worse, and kind of sealed, I sealed my fate was sealed there. I don't really think that any healthy version of us would have survived without the complete and total failure of the marriage. It doesn't mean that everything had to happen exactly the way that it happened, but like the book says, we do things that put ourselves in a position to be hurt. And then we rail about how people hurt us. I didn't leave her any good options. She was a mom who had 2 girls. She's a good mom and she's a good person. And I don't agree with everything that she did. But it's not really mine to judge. I put her in a terrible position. Looking back on all of it, one of the things that this time I had to get sober, and it had to really mean something. And it was almost not even because I knew that I had to be sober because of what would happen if I kept drinking or became suicidal or any of those things. It was almost like I have to get sober because that's the only thing I'm going to have. Everything else has I would say, been taken away from me, but I'd given it away. I had made so many bad choices along the way, and yes, there were bad things that did happen to me, and things that were unfortunate and things that were unfair. But I was putting myself in a position for that stuff to happen. There's a word for that. Someone that just always seems to be having bad luck. They call it buzzard's luck. Usually there's something going on there, unless your name is Job. I just, at least for me anyway, I played a role in all of it. And I've almost had to rewrite my own story. I've been in treatment a lot. I've been around the rooms of AA a lot, but I've never really given it an honest shake. I've never done all the stuff I was told to do, never really gotten into the literature. I'm absolutely in love with the book now. First of all, because of its source material, but also because there's so much in there that so clearly defines the problem. I've had to rewrite my story, to myself, like what I see as my narrative, the story of Jason and how I got here. Another one of our pithy sayings is that it's an inside job, meaning the world didn't do this to me. I did this to me. And that's actually good news because I can't control anybody else. I can only control myself. So if the problem is everyone else in the world around me, there's no solution for that. I can't change people, places, and things. All I can do is change me. And for whatever reason, that message just really hit home. I've had some really good sponsors. I've had people in my life that knew when to use the soft touch and when to use tough love. But mostly, I have wanted this. And it was ultimately a question a lady asked me about my kids. And she said, this is one of the times I was in the hospital after my vacation. Once I finally made my way back to Atlanta, I had a staph infection that turned into sepsis and nearly died from that. Although that wasn't anything nearly as bad as a pancreatitis. But if if it had been another day or two before I had checked in, I would have been in really bad shape. But one of the doctors there asked me, don't you want to see your daughter grow up? Don't you want to walk her down the aisle? And I don't know why, but she asked me that, and it just that question just landed with me. And so I thought, it doesn't matter. Nothing else matters except my relationship with my kids. Everything else could go to crap, and I could still be a good father. And that is worth living for. That's worth getting sober for. It's more important than a romantic relationship. I have smart, complicated kids who were struggling. I can be that. I can handle that. I may not ever achieve any of my other life goals, but this I can get right. And the thing that's so crazy is it's been so much more. I'm coming up on 2 years of sobriety, and I'm not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, or all those things haven't come back together, but I can see lines from where I'm at to those kinds of things being in my life again. That respectability and economic insecurity, and I can see a time in my life where all those things are a thing of the past. I have a lot of examples in my life of people who started over, older than me even. I had an opportunity last week to represent a young man who was in our program and was caught up in the administrative aspects of an accountability court, like a drug or a DUI court that he was in. He was facing 4 years, and the state really wanted to nail him to the wall for a lot of reasons that are complicated and that I won't get into, but were not his fault. Were more political and would have had nothing to do with what this person actually needed. And his family, I knew his dad through AA. He asked me if I would represent him because he and I become friends anyway. And I did. And we got an amazing result for him and for the family. And it's you talk about God redeeming that, my bar license, something that I've had kind of a love-hate relationship with. I haven't always been grateful for what I do for a living and the ability to do that. It just, a lot of stuff kind of came full circle with that. And I saw a whole bunch of new ways that I can do what we call 12-step work, which is helping other alcoholics. I have a unique skill set that was able to do this, and it was only me, who had this.
You said it earlier, to keep what we've got to give it away.
We've got to give it away. And we neither regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. I'll read you, since I guess we're coming towards the end. Let me read you it's very short, just the paragraph that is a part of. These are the 9-step promises, which comes right after the narrative portion of the book dealing with how you actually do the 9th step. If we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. So that's kind of that is read a lot of times at every meeting, along with the part of the book that actually deals with the 12 steps. But you see how much in there. I don't know if the word alcohol even appears in that section. It has nothing to do with drinking. It has to do with the way we maintain our spiritual connection to God and to others. And that, as a byproduct of that, the alcohol problem, by the time you're doing the 9th step, which is actually making amends, at that point, most people haven't had a thought of actually drinking in a long time. And they're actually starting to clear up some of the wreckage from the past and starting to get a little taste of freedom from that. And so being able to use my bar license and my law degree and some things that were the product of a time in my life where I was totally selfish and totally self-focused. And these things were going to give me prestige and make me wealthy. And you were going to think a lot of me because I had these things. Instead, now using them to help people after having been humbled myself, there's a symmetry there that's really cool. And, I'm just getting started. So,
I love that. I love you and I'm proud of you. And I think it's massively encouraging to hear you say you're just getting started. To the person listening right now who has a family member or a dear friend battling addiction of some type of substance, what do you want to say?
To the people that have a family member or a friend who's battling addiction, I would want for them to know that in spite of the behavior that they see in their loved one, they have to a large extent lost the power of control over their actions. And so when people say things like that was the booze talking or that's the drugs talking or there's a truth to that, and the person they love very often is still in there. Everything you see on the outside is a product of the disease. This is something that AA intuitively knew for a long time, but the science now backs them up. The physical process of addiction essentially rewires your brain so that it believes that the things, whatever the substance is, it's killing the addict, is necessary to their survival. So, when you drink water and you haven't had, and you're really thirsty, or if you eat a good meal, or anything that is necessary to the continuation of the species, sex, all the things that naturally feel good to us are because of the reward center in our brain. And so addiction hijacks that system and essentially tells your brain that something that is very bad for you is actually necessary for you to live. And this is happening on a level that you're not really fully conscious of, what people refer to as the evolutionary, the lizard brain, from that perspective, the part of your brain that operates without you thinking of it consciously, the thing that keeps you breathing while you're asleep, the thing that tells your heart to beat. And so it can look like they have completely gone to the dark side. They haven't. They're just completely eaten up with this, what the ADA does classify as an illness. So there's hope for anyone as far as what loved ones and family members can do. The one thing you can't do is want them sober, if that makes sense. You can't make them want to get sober. That's something that only the addict can want. And so once they have exhibited that, I would say, depending on your role in that person's life, whatever you can do to help to make it easier for them to get to treatment. And I think everyone knows at this point that enabling is a bad thing, but I'm a little softer on that than sometimes the hardcore AA types. And that's just because we have a lot of science now that shows us that, especially with like opiates and stuff like that, the goal should just be keep them alive. A lot of times people naturally develop the desire to make a sincere effort at stopping, but sometimes that has to happen after they've hit their head several times. And so I would say, as long as you're not hurting yourself or ignoring your own needs, anything that can be done to at least preserve the the life of a person who is currently in active addiction and showing no signs of wanting to stop anytime soon. If they ask for help, you just have to kind of use good judgment. But I don't think that anyone would ever regret an act that was intended to preserve the life of someone, even if they're being manipulated. And I would rather come down on the side of believing somebody and allowing myself maybe to be manipulated rather than wonder, did I do everything I could if we lose them?
To the person listening or watching right now that is battling alcoholism, what do you want to say?
I would say that no one is beyond help and no one is hopeless. I've never seen a hopeless case. if there were one, I would have been it. And people who are suffering from addiction are not bad people trying to get good. They're sick people trying to get well. And there's a huge difference between those two things. And the stigma of alcoholism and addiction have not fully gone away yet, but there are a lot of places that have seen the light on that. And there are places where you can acknowledge that you need help, and it doesn't set you back, whether it's an employer or and I've seen that personally. I've seen some situations where I'm amazed by how advanced companies are in their thinking. But if it comes down to it, any addict or alcoholic who's trying to make a decision between something that would benefit their sobriety and potentially save their life, or the decision of whether or not to get help, and the fear of being found out or losing your job or losing your relationship or losing your standing in the community, anything that is placed ahead of your addiction, you will lose. And it's primary. It has to be dealt with before you can worry about any of the other stuff. I don't care what the consequences are. If it means your spouse will leave you, if it means you'll lose your job, if it means you may not have custody of your child the way you want to for a period of time, it is always better to seek help rather than fear what could happen if people know, because they almost always will anyway at the end of the day. This is a progressive disease, and unchecked, it will kill you. It's not even sometimes. It will always kill you. If you're an alcoholic or an addict and you don't seek treatment, you will die. It's as simple as that. Those are the stakes.
Wow. This is just so good, and you're just going to do so much good with your story. I love you. I'm proud of you. Hearing your story is so compelling. I can't wait to see where the journey takes you next. And I'm grateful for your time and for you being so vulnerable and sharing your story.
Thanks, man. Love you.
As always, thank you for listening. I have to give a shout out to No Longer Bound. I don't know if anyone from that organization will hear these conversations, but you helped save my brother's life, so thank you. For anyone that knows someone that's struggling with a drug or alcohol addiction, if you're based here in the Atlanta, Georgia area, No Longer Bound is clearly a phenomenal resource. In addition, Alcoholics Anonymous, it's been in existence since 1935 and is credited for helping 2 million people break free from the cycle of alcoholism. So, as always, please like, comment, and share with anyone that you think this may help. We'll see you next time.